Well, it's my honor to facilitate this panel today. As Kim said, I recently took on the role as Managing Director for NetSPI. We specialize in offensive and pen testing. While I have the title Managing Director, I like to say I'm a CISO advocate. Having been on the other side of the table, I empathize, sympathize with the challenges you all face, and I try to bring that to what we're trying to accomplish. So what I'd like to do is, rather than me introducing everybody, have each person introduce themselves. I'm going to ask them to say their name, their title, where they're from, and a little bit about their background. So first, Sara.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Okay, no feedback? We've all gotten the feedback warning. My name's Sara Flores. I'm currently the Deputy CISO at First National Bank of Omaha. I am based in Kansas City. I feel like Omaha is my second home. I keep asking my fellow panelists, do you all know each other? Because I feel like that's a very Omaha thing. Everyone in this room feels like they know each other. So I'm happy to be here and glad to be part of the community now, I feel like. Currently the Deputy CISO, I feel like we all have really unique stories. I find sometimes, I said the other day, I feel like every InfoSec professional has like a secret superpower. And so I'll say, I started my career off selling pianos. And so selling pianos led to being a self-taught developer, led to being in InfoSec and technology for the last 20 years. I specialize in financial services. I've done everything from development to consulting to risk to privacy to InfoSec. So pretty diverse background, and I always learn things when I'm here, so I'm excited to be here with my fellow panelists and hear their stories too.
I'm Melissa Moreno. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Lindsay Corporation. We manufacture agricultural and industrial solutions. So I have been at Lindsay just for a year, and I lead our infrastructure and cybersecurity areas. Prior to Lindsay, I was at Gallup, where I did the same job, where I was CIO for cybersecurity and infrastructure. My career is not as varied as yours, I guess. I've worked in technology for over 20 years. I started my career in the ERP area, software development, and then found my way over to infrastructure and cybersecurity about 10 years ago.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chad Lynch. I'm the CIO and CISO at Metropolitan Community College. We have about 8 campuses, 4 main campuses and 4 satellites. We have about 12,000 to 15,000 students and about a staff of 1,500. I've been there for about 6 years. I've been in IT security, cybersecurity for about 30 years. Did a stint in the Air Force for 23 years. Then did corporate here in Omaha for about 8 to 10 years after that. It's funny that Sara said with the start of your story, how we end up here. I started out as a butcher, and then I was a Polish and Russian linguist for a while, and then now I got into IT and did satellites and came here. So it's interesting where you start, where you end up. So thanks.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Rob LaMagna-Reiter, CISO at Hudl. We deliver, I think, the only and best sports and analytics performance solution for athletes at all divisions and levels throughout the world. So a pretty phenomenal impact on athletes, coaches, teams, and helping them succeed and win. I have been doing the security thing among several domains for going on 17 years. I've had the opportunity to function in roles, government communications, retail. I was previously at FNTS, leading with a managed services group, helping to secure that program, working with Jeff and Sara. So that was phenomenal. And I find myself here at Hudl. So my experience is across multiple verticals. Maybe something unique about me is I got my career start. I've always been in cybersecurity. So for those that might have attended the University of Nebraska Omaha, if Professor Blaine Burnham rings a bell, that was probably where some of the material from the keynote came from as well, right? Had a very fantastic impact on us. So I was doing this InfoSec thing from when it started. So I don't have any unique stories, but I've been doing this as long as I can remember.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for the intros. We want to make this as discussion-oriented and participative as possible. We do have some set questions, but the goal is to prompt conversation from everybody. So if anybody has a question, don't hesitate. Raise your hand, stand up, do a flip, whatever you're more comfortable with. So to get us started, though, one of the things that we see a lot of, and we've heard a lot in the press, is nation-state attacks, especially with the current issues with the conflict with Russia and the Ukraine. So I'd like to have a couple of you kind of talk through how you've responded, if you've had to respond, and what are you doing to communicate this back to your board or your governing bodies? And the theme today on some of these questions and points will be, how do you handle cybersecurity with your business leaders, your boards, maybe regulators or auditors if you're in that kind of industry? So since we do have somebody up here with experience in foreign languages, Chad, I'm going to go with you first. If you,
I knew I shouldn't have said that, but I'm just hoping they don't send me back to Poland with everything going on. So, yeah, so some of the experience we've been seeing from Russia, China, and one of the ones that we didn't really think we'd see that much is coming from the Netherlands, because they have a lot of, they're not really regulated on some of the things they're seeing. But part of what we have to do is we have students from all over the world coming to Metro and remotely studying for us. So we have to kind of really balance where do we leave the network so people can actually study from wherever they're at, and where do we actually regulate it. So we're constantly communicating with our executive staff and letting them know where we're balancing that and what trends we're seeing with the global community on that. So kind of keeping control on that.
Melissa, would you go ahead? I'd be fascinated what you face for your industry.
Yeah, so Lindsay has customers on both sides of the conflict. So we have customer devices in the Ukraine and in Russia. So we're not only protecting the customer devices, but our network as well. We also have employees on both sides of the conflict. So we have been fortunate that none of our customer devices, we haven't had any reported issues with those. So our customers are able to continue to grow the crops that they need to feed their people. And then on the network, we have really not seen a huge uptick in attacks. We've seen quite a few more phishing attempts that are targeted around the Ukrainian relief and things like that. But what we're really focusing on is incident response and business continuity. And then because our company has taken a position of no longer doing, or temporarily at least, not doing business in Russia and Belarus, we are worried about retaliatory attacks at some time in the future when the conflict is over. So we're busy preparing for hopefully something that never happens, but something that we do need to be prepared for.
So I would offer a little bit of a contrast to what Chad and Melissa just spoke about. In financial services, nation-state attacks are pretty common fare for us. It's something that we're always thinking about, that we've been thinking about. I think part of that is the benefit, quote-unquote benefit, of being declared part of critical infrastructure for years and years and years. It's just something that's always top of mind. So what I'll say is someone asked a really good question earlier during Rob's discussion around how do you balance the communication with your executives. And so I can say in terms of what we're doing now, it's conversational. This is becoming very public. This is something that we need to probably address right away because it is something that's top of mind for executives, but it's not something that for us has required this repeated dialogue around what are you doing now? What are you doing now? What are you doing now? But I think that's a testament to, again, how conversational it is, this ongoing dialogue with your executives that's so important. I do think, going back to that question, it's a balance. I mean, you have to balance the talking about the things that are important to you and talking about the things that everybody always says to me, like, what's the sexy thing in InfoSec right now? Well, right now it's nation states. And so I think that it's a balance between talking about your strategy, talking about the things that are really important, and talking about those things that are really important to your executives, because when it comes down to it, who's writing the check at the end of the day? And a lot of times we have to have the conversations that may be common fare for us as professionals in the biz. It's not so common fare for them. And so we do have to have, I think, a little bit of patience in going to the table, having those discussions about the latest and greatest big thing, because part of our job is education. I think you guys would probably agree. Rob, did you want to add?
Discussed everything that I would have added or leaned into. I mean, if I can add my verticals, specific on it, it would be availability in our business trumps a lot of the other attributes of our business. So we're more focused on ensuring that adequate preventative, detective, and response measures are in place, like all of our colleagues up here. We have customers on both sides of the conflict. We have teams and coaches, athletes across using our solution, as well as cameras, IoT devices, right? You have equipment that are out there that we've tried to ensure that we have the right resiliency measures while maintaining customer expectations that are using the platform, but also protecting that that PII that we have. So I think there's a little bit of a difference between one-off nation-state attacks and a true nation-state attack, right? You typically we all feel the noise from maybe enhanced little nation-state activity, but if a nation-state is really after you, then I think that that's a whole different question that enacts a whole different playbook, because then they have the full suite of services against your organization, and that gets that, like I said, that executes different procedures.
All right, Rob, if you would keep the mic. Let's go to this next one, and this may be as much therapeutic or counseling. Let's really ask ourselves, do the board of directors, do our non-business executives, do they really care about cybersecurity? Or are we really just telling ourselves that that is in fact true? Much to your point, they care when there's a nation-state attack and it's right in front of them. So, or do you think they really get it? Since, Rob, you're building a program from scratch, you're just getting going. Love to get your perspective, what you're experiencing, then let's hear from the other panelists.
Very good question. I think the most accurate answer is they do care, but I think the caveat to that is they don't know what to care about. So it's my team's job and my job to continue to help them remain focused on what's pertinent to them to make the best decisions strategically for the organization, to make sure we have alignment on the resources for my team to execute and do their job against the risk profile and framework, right? So they get it, because that's evident from committing the resources to building a program, building the team, recognizing that as the organization is scaling, that this is something that we need to get in front of and take proactive measures on. So yes, they get it, but they're still at that point where they don't know what questions to ask. So I'm trying to be as transparent in building the program to educate them on why we're focusing on certain KPIs and KRIs, and why we're focusing efforts in certain areas, why we're prioritizing certain risks over another, and being very transparent about helping them commit to certain risk levels, because that's also a new muscle they haven't exercised. So it's a very unique opportunity to help coach and educate them on something they recognized they want to support, but they also want to know how to support me the best. And that's also where that coaching and education and partnership comes into play.
Yeah, with the college, it was a little bit different. I was one of the first CISOs there about 6 years ago. And when I first came on, the first thing I heard from everybody was cybersecurity is important, it's everybody's responsibility. And that was about it. So they didn't tell me how it was anybody's responsibility or what they needed to know. So we basically started from scratch on that. We've been doing a lot of tabletop exercises to really get our leadership involved in that, and knowing what security measures there are, how it goes beyond just a security team, that everybody has their own role to play. But we've had, in Des Moines and a couple other places close to home, we've had some really big attacks that actually just knocked down operations for about 4 to 6 weeks. Didn't take money or ransom, but for us, students and the time is more important than that was. So it really hit home, and they became really interested in what I do. So thanks.
And I can't speak for all boards, but my board is very concerned with cybersecurity. They may not understand the ins and outs, but they don't need to. That's what they have me for. So I can really help them understand what they need to be focusing on, and they ask great questions that keep me on my toes and make me think about things that maybe I hadn't, because I might get too far down in the weeds where they're at a very high level and reading different things. So I think it goes back to education, to being transparent, and being available for questions when they have them.
I love what you said about availability, because I think that that's something that really comes into play when you're starting to build that knowledge with your board or your executive leadership, is being available to do that education. I'll answer the question in 2 parts. I'll speak for the bank. I am so impressed with our executives and our leadership's interest in cyber. They're frankly, their capability to understand some of the complexities. I've had the opportunity, before I joined the bank, I've been with First National, I think I said 9 months. Before that, I was the CISO for a bank out of Kansas City, and I've had the opportunity to work with fellow CISOs over the last 10 years across the entire country. And so I feel like I'm speaking with some level of experience when I say that when I compare and contrast what I see now compared to what I've seen in the past, myself or with my peers, our executive team has the aptitude to have these types of discussions, which I think puts us in a really good position to do more, have a really meaningful discussion around risk appetite, because I think that they are starting to get it. The second part of my answer is in terms of as a whole, do I feel like executives or leaders need to understand cybersecurity? Do they want to? I mean, the answer is yes. I think we would all say yes, they do. Someone told me once, early in my career, I was a little baby CISO building out my program, and so they said, you got to keep it ducky bunny. And so Rob said, the KISS principle. I like seeing ducks and bunnies, and now I'm going to think rainbows and groundhogs at the same time. But you have to, and I think this is something that we all have to challenge ourselves to do, is we've got to be good at putting the slide decks together. You got to be personable. You got to make the jokes. I once, not kidding, I'm obviously going down a rabbit hole here, but one point I literally had a discussion with 40 executives on malware variants and talked to them about it in terms of, how do you like your burger? Is it a cheeseburger? Is it a cheeseburger with bacon? And you know, I've had to be really creative in my analogies in terms of getting executives to understand. Should they understand it? Yes. Can they understand it? I see 100% day to day, yes, they can. So I think that we have to challenge ourselves to build the skill set to be able to do that.
Okay, really good responses. So let's start the tally here. We've got rainbows, gophers, burgers, bunnies. Did I miss any yet? Any questions yet from the audience? Yeah, Mark.
So a lot of our predecessors have used fear, uncertainty, and doubt to talk to boards and talk to executives. Have you experienced that mentality that you've had to repair, and how did you do it?
So I've kind of seen both sides of that. So when I was in the military, the fear and doubt really was the method to go with the generals and everything else on that way. But with our board in education, it's all about storytelling. You have to tell them what relates to them, and then be blunt and straight with the facts on what the risks are. But it has to be relatable. How does it affect our students? How does it affect our income that we have from the state and the legislatures? And how fast are we going to get things back up? Those are the key things. Just get to the point, give them the story, how it's relatable, and then move on for it, and they'll back you up. So
We've portrayed it in terms of top and bottom line impact, right? The revenue that they would not be able to achieve, lock in, right, as a result of not committing and achieving certain security and compliance objectives or risk appetite statements, and then the potential and likelihood and impact of a potential loss. And so that resonates well with them. I think they put more emphasis right now on what can we do to ensure growth achievement versus, you know, what's the real likelihood, right? Everybody has that qualitative challenge and quantitative challenge of sometimes how much they want to stomach when they're in certain growth versus maintenance modes. But that's how we've approached the topic with the exec team and the board, to give them both our recommendations and the outputs of those recommendations, and that's what leads into ultimately our strategy to go forth and execute. So that's how we've handled that.
Yeah, I think the fear mongering only works for so long. I think you lose a lot of credibility if meeting after meeting that's all you're doing. And so I think you have to be straightforward with the facts of this is how bad it could be, and use some of those stories around the worst case that you've seen in the news, but it can't all be about that. It has to be like, what's the risk that something like that would happen to us? And here's what we would do if something like that were to happen. Here's how we'd respond. So to me, I think there's a time and a place for that, but it's extremely limited in scope.
I agree, there is a time and a place, because sometimes there are some scary things that you need to talk about, but I think I would just agree with everybody else on the panel. I'll throw in one thing that I was starting to hear something about here a year or so ago was this term of confidence building measures. So there's KRIs, key risk indicators, there's KPIs, key performance indicators. I'm also hearing OKRs, objectives, key results. Someone said measure what matters earlier, and I think that's the book that it came from. But this confidence building measure concept is something that I'd be interested in learning more about if any of you have heard this. But I want to say, and it could be anything. I think I heard, I'm trying to think, ways of turning KPIs or OKRs or these things that usually indicate risk and kind of turning it on its head, and how can I tell a positive story here as opposed to this is what's going to tell you something bad's going to happen.
I think that was good. I appreciate the question, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Following up on what Sarah's point was, I like to use the word context. So can you put the story in context relative to the business areas? And I've challenged my teams and people I work with from a business standpoint. Would a company eliminate a division when they consider the cybersecurity risk? Are they willing to look at the cost, the expense of the security in the business context for profitability and things like that? So I like the question. There was another one out there. Oh, yeah. He's going to bring the mic to you.
Perhaps more of a comment than a question, but you know, down at Stratcom, we built a new headquarters, and it cost, by my best estimate, about $1.3 billion. And you asked about commitment of the senior people. From the president on down, they committed about $500 million for security. I recall talking to a lady, and I don't remember her first name. Her last name is McQueen, an easy name to remember. And she had helped build, she worked for the Corps of Engineers, and they had built the original SAC headquarters. And she said, when we built that, we worried about somebody dropping a bomb on it. Today, we worry about somebody sending a message down the line and frying everything. So I think when you ask the question, is there commitment at the top? In that case, there certainly was.
Good. We have another question back over here.
So used to having to sell our wares, explain ourselves. I mean, how many times, even to close partners who should understand, you're explaining over and over and over again. We got to do better talking, I think, and more listening. And sometimes that means investing time. I'm just so guilty of, I just want to get stuff done. I just want to get stuff done. We can't afford to sit still in this business. And I am continuing to learn that patience is important, listening is important. Like I said, that's totally touchy-feely, but it's legit. We have to be better listeners.
I think a lot of it is, you know, building relationships and the credibility so that when you're asking them to do something, they know you're not just trying to do something because you can or you have the power to do it. It's really in the best interest of the entire company. And it's, you know, it's pretty contrite, but just spending a lot of time explaining why we're doing something. So not so much what we're doing, but why and how it's going to protect us and the benefits of it. And then being empathetic to the impacts that it does have on them, because a lot of the things we ask people to do is going to make their jobs harder, or it's going to take away things that maybe they've been able to do on their own. Now they're going to have to ask someone to do it for them. So listening, understanding, and then trying to make suggestions to them that could help them with their job with the new controls that you're introducing.
Yeah, I think it is part of our role to be the CIO of no. I think we have to be able to stand up to what priorities are and what we say. But I agree with everyone said, that we have to be able to communicate, and part of my job is making the time to go meet with the stakeholders and having the meetings. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment by having those. But you have to be able to do that and really listen to what their impact is. I think they're less worried about the CIO of no saying that than not being heard. If we listen to what they're saying and where we can go with them, where they fit in the larger scheme of what we're trying to get done and why we're protecting data and everything else, I think you're going to have a better relationship working with everybody.
A couple thoughts there to expand upon what everybody talked about. When I was at FNTS, Jeff made a very fantastic comment and observation about when you're dealing with an incident, security doesn't have the luxury of being wrong, right? The same thing goes with implementation and working across the aisles internally. Security doesn't have the luxury of stubbing our toes and getting it wrong, because that will shut down progress across the organization just as much as, you know, us whiffing on an incident. So taking it slow and understanding what the long game is, setting the expectation that this is the path that we're going down, that leadership is bought in on, but I value your opinion and value your understanding and value your expertise. We actually overshot on some of our early projects, bringing in more stakeholders than we thought possibly could have been, but we were concerned with the customers of our customer, right? So the customers of the business application stakeholders, the customers of those business units. Because in order for security to be effective, as I mentioned earlier today, we need to know how the business operates better than the business thinks they operate. We need to be able to answer and anticipate questions that the business, when they commit to us how they believe things operate, we want to be able to ask pointed and smart and tough questions. We want to be able to create the warm fuzzies. So at the same time, you got to keep velocity and momentum up, because we have deadlines too and commitments up to our board and leadership. So it takes exercising that muscle and skill of both restraint, patience, and positive encouragement with the fact that, hey, you know, this is also going to make your life easier because we're solving for X, Y, and Z. And at least that's the case of what we're building at Hudl, right? We're helping to eliminate a burden off a lot of individual teams. So your message will vary depending on the organization you're in, right? Those that are more mature have more defined processes and expectations. People are like, yeah, that's great. Security is going down that initiative. I get, you know, who's part of that project group or that stakeholder group. But as we've been building up and exercising new muscles and stretching new muscles that have never been in effect before, making sure we're soliciting as much feedback up front or more than necessary is going to pay dividends in the future, because we are making sure people have that confidence that we're executing with not only their you know, priorities in line, but that we have our customers' interests at the best heart. So yeah, your mileage will vary depending on the maturity of your organization.
Any more questions?
So if I'm hearing your comments right, to be good in cybersecurity, we need to learn counseling, psychology, marketing, sales, business. We need an MBA. Where does this technology stuff fit in?
You saw us, a couple of us laughing. Sara and I were having a conversation earlier this afternoon, and one of the topics I brought up to her, and she, obviously from the book she's been listening to, played off of it, and I go, we haven't really dedicated as much of what I'll call the counseling and the emotional support security people need. I said it, when you're in the middle of an incident, you're facing a lot of decisions to make, and the wear and tear on the individual can be dramatic. She actually pulled it that a lot of what we face day to day. So your point about what are all the things we need to be aware of, kind of struck home. But I'd like to hear what are the other things you see that our security people need to build from a business standpoint to be successful. Okay, and from a technology standpoint. So not just what's the business side, but what's the technical side, whether it's cloud, mainframe, they still exist. They're there. They're not going away. IoT, all of that. So let's start with Melissa.
I always say that technology is easy and people are hard. So the technology can take care of no problem. And I also think it's important to have technologists that are really great at technology focus on the technology, and have people that are really great with people and the change management and the communication, have them focus on that and let them work behind the scenes. And don't try and force people that really hate talking to people and are not good at it. Don't make them do that. Let them do what they're really great at and have heads down on a keyboard and support them all day, and then partner them with people that do like to talk to people and can explain those really complex terms and concepts in simple ways. So I think you really have to focus on what people do really well, give them the opportunity to do that, and find people that can do the other pieces really well and not try and be so well-rounded in all cases.
Yeah, I agree. One thing for us too, I think our roles is really as strategists, as CISOs as well. So we're looking at the technology pieces where we're trying to go and meet the mission of everybody. But we do have technologists to do the hands-on thing, and I think our leaders depend on us to be that kind of bridge between the technology and their panic, trying to calm them down and make sure that we're doing things. But they still want us to know what's our strategy and where we're going with that, and we don't know what the technology is doing. We're not able to do that. But one thing I do present to all my briefings too is security shouldn't be a silo. So where does this belong in the org structure? It's horizontal across the whole thing. It doesn't matter if you're doing enrollment, if you're a bus driver, whatever. Security is across all of those, and we just have to kind of know that we're not just a bucket to have a cost center and do that. We're across everything, and one small security incident affects everybody at the organization.
Well, we're not in security, are we? We're in risk management and trust, right? And so that spans all verticals, all disciplines. As a leader, most of my time, beyond making sure my team is insulated from some of the noise that doesn't impact their day-to-day, is making sure they have the adequate cycles, support, coaching, empowerment, and the ability to execute on areas that they may have, areas that they want to dive into, right? That could span, learning more about the business. That could span getting up to speed on the newest and greatest technology or processes, you name it, right? I'm still a big believer that the continued refocus and education on a lot of the enhancements to the basics are going to make us better as individuals, because it forces you to understand all of the secondary and tertiary supporting factors that go into, well, what are the downstream impacts, and can you get into economics, even practice things like game theory and all those things that don't directly relate to cybersecurity or risk management. Keeping those in mind and knowing that there's going to be more to learn, more to consume than you have time in any day, week, month, and just plot out a plan. And as leaders, it's our job to make sure our staffs have that capability, have the time, and then they're empowered and supported to do all that, right? Just being an impeccable human being and understanding there's more facets than just the day-to-day security stuff, because if you just focus on the security stuff, you're going to miss more than half the problem.
To go back to the question that you asked, like, what about the technology? I think we said IoT cloud. Like, that's what's top of mind for us and for our team. What I've realized, I think we all realize, is that we can't know everything. And so I'm finding myself trying to, how can I ingest as much knowledge as possible? How can our teams ingest as much knowledge as possible? And there's just, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but there's just this fatigue of all of this information that you're trying to consume all at once. And so I find relying on the cloud team to be the experts in cloud, relying on there are people in this room, vendor partners, that I have heavily relied on because you're seeing so much out there. I'm heads down working for the bank. You're seeing a lot out there. I think it's being able to leverage the people who are really good. Like Melissa, you said this, leverage the people that are really good and much smarter than I am to do what they're good at. I kind of want to piggyback on something that Rob was talking about. Just, we're being asked to do so much more than security. And I think there's questions that have come out over and over again today about how do we get the job done? How do we get buy-in? How do we get the resources? And I really feel that in order to accomplish that, we have to become, like Rob, what you said, we've got to be more than security professionals. In financial services, a few years ago, all of a sudden, you could not be a security leader if all you knew was security. Security got ripped out of the IT organization, and I think one of Norm's questions is probably along those same lines: where should security sit? But in financial services, I think a lot of us experienced InfoSec got ripped out of IT and put anywhere in the organization except for in IT, and all of a sudden you couldn't speak technology anymore. You had to speak risk and privacy and compliance and CompreSec. That was something new. I hadn't heard that one today, but yeah, we've got to speak. So I'll speak for myself. I feel like I have to speak many languages, not your type of languages, Chad. I feel like I have to speak many languages, and I'd be curious as to what you guys think. I think as security professionals as a whole, it's not going to be, the future is, we will not be able to just speak security. We're going to have to speak a few other different languages.
Well, along those lines of acknowledging there's a lot of different things happening, especially in I'll use the term the new norm. Through the pandemic, I felt like I needed counseling because everybody had said I had to be new. We actually have a virtual question, so I didn't want to forget that we do have people that are not here. So Kim, you have the question.
She was very persistent, Pamela, because she asked it twice. As a quote I heard during the keynote speech, leading with empathy, how can we get buy-in from both leadership and engineers for change, moving from old school AV to next gen, getting our technology to keep up with what the hackers can do?
I think it's only fair that if she pulled that from the keynote, we have the keynote respond first. So Rob?
There were a couple of things packed within that question, right? Getting the leadership and engineer buy-in, but then also current gen AV to next gen AV. I think that was all part of the loaded question. I would say that it sounds like there's been an identified gap between a risk identified that current AV, you call it, right, and next gen AV could potentially resolve. My recommendation within that context would be, how have we quantified or qualified what that expanded or different risk is, and how we are moving forward in one path, and the recommendation is to go down presumably next gen AV. Is that the only solution? What are your leadership and engineering counterparts pushing back against, right? Is it just a technology change, the cycles that would be devoted to that technology change, or is it just change in general, right? That unknown, right? That fear that all of us are up against. Putting ourselves in their shoes, helping them understand that we're all responsible for managing an organization's risk appetite, right? As security, we don't own risk for the organization. The business units own the risk. And so having that individual or the team build consensus both from peers and leadership to articulate the options, the recommendation, the path forward, and why it's aligned with business strategy too, right? You can't just recommend a new technology to recommend a new technology. That'll get shot down, day after day. There has to be a reason to do some sort of technology replacement if it's filling a valid void. So being able to clearly articulate that, being able to listen to the objections, being able to solicit buy-in across different aisles. And buy-in doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to agree with you. It just means that they'll help support you, get you the resources you need. They'll back you up. A yes, but it has to wait is also an agreement too, right? So be cognizant of the timeline, the business constraints, and that the long-term goal is to solve whatever gap or risk that you've identified, right? And I understand that the solution that you proposed was next-gen AV. It might be that, or potentially it could be pulling the triggers on different standards or hardening standards, right? Or different services that you shut down and so forth. There could be different ways to skin a cat, and you need to present your recommendation as the most cost-effective, beneficial, strategic aligned reason, right? And then having frank and real talk conversations with those individuals. So,
No, I agree with that. One thing that we're seeing in higher education that I see is I can't go in with the innovation plan to our team and talk about smart campuses or AI or machine learning. They're going to glaze over as soon as I say that. So I really have to go in, like Rob said, is what are the requirements that we're trying to do? They understand that we're going to triple our enrollment in the next 5 years. How am I going to have the security and the infrastructure to support that? And then I can explain it. It's really just kind of speaking the language and explaining and asking a lot of questions of what they're wanting and how we're going to be able to fit those scenarios.
And the only thing I would add is that the threat landscape doesn't stand still, so we can't stand still either. So, our jobs are never done. Doesn't mean we have to adopt the best thing or the newest thing that comes out and everything, but we can't stand still. If we do, we're already behind.
I was trying to merge the question around empathy, which is sometimes I think an easier question than to answer why we need to move to next gen AV. I love what you just said, just the way that you explained exactly how you would go to your leadership is that things are changing. We need to do something different. I think that that's how I would marry up those two questions is speaking with empathy means understanding your audience and not just understanding who they are by job title, but really think, even if it's just for 30 seconds, 60 seconds in the elevator or on the stairs on your way there, who are they? What's important to them? Why is what's important to me also important to them?
We have another question over here.
All right. Hi. So you guys are all CISOs, and CISO burnout is quite a thing. I think it's about 2 years. So kind of how do you see that getting better? Because obviously experience in the industry, understanding your organization. If you leave the organization, it causes a lot of complexities for the organization. So what can we do to make CISO burnout less of a thing?
All right, let's look at this. Rob, you're what? How many months into your position now? 6 months. Chad?
About 6 years.
6 years. Melissa? 1 year. Sarah? What, 8 months?
I've been a CISO for 8 years.
8 years. So I've been in and out of a CISO role over a few decades now, but I'm in my current role since the 1st of December. So it's a reality statement when you say, is it burnout, or have we dedicated ourselves to a profession and choose to make changes as to where we might employ our services? So I'll start with Chad, who's the most tenured, then we'll go to Sara, then Melissa, then Rob.
I think I look at CISO burnout a little bit differently as an educator. I'm looking at it as I'm constantly learning and teaching our other security analysts and engineers to kind of learn my job. I want them to be successful and to kind of move into my job someday when I move somewhere else or retire. That's what our job should be as an educator. But I'm also looking at students we're bringing in. We have a lot of students that come through. We're teaching security, and I want them to be interested in what I'm doing and my example that I'm showing as well, so we can get them into the community of Omaha organizations as well. So I do believe it's a burnout is a thing, but I think it's a philosophy or a mental thing on the CISOs too, on how much you're taking and how much you can kind of teach and keep it as a philosophy and moving forward that way.
It's a tough question. I want to share that I've been with First National for 9 months. I did move from another bank, and when I was trying to decide what was next, we all know that there's a lot out there. There are a lot of opportunities out there right now. I think there's going to continue to be. And so I felt like I could be really picky about what I did next. And I really had to give it some thought around, do I still want to do this? And my boss is sitting in the front row. Well, this is a story about my boss. So you bet I do. I haven't been drinking yet. It's all true. So I had this chance to decide, am I going to do this or not? Am I going to do I still want to be a CISO? Do I even want to be in cyber? And I was looking at a couple of different things, and we've known each other for years. He's one of those CISOs that I would call up and just say, hey, what are you doing here? And he calls me up and he's like, you need to come do this. And I said, really? He's like, no, really. He's like, I've got the best executive team. I've got the best InfoSec team. You would not want to do cyber anywhere else. And so I tell that story, one, because it's true. He's been in his role for 22 years. So I think that I was like, this is BS, man. This is not true. I say that because it was not BS. The executive team, the InfoSec department, the team, just the smart people. I just can't tell you enough what it means to be around such really, really smart people. And it's not BS because he's been doing it for 22 years. And so in terms of burnout, the obvious answer is, gosh, just take care of yourself, ask for what you need, rest. I see that we as a team at the bank, we do that. But more importantly, I keep going back to, well, what Rob said in terms of leading with empathy, what I've been saying around, we got to be good communicators. Those two things that I mentioned, the executive team and the team that you surround yourself with, like those are critical in preventing burnout. And you don't get that unless you're a good communicator, unless you're empathetic.
Now, I wish my boss was in the audience because I would say there's an easy answer and it's just pay us more. But to anybody else, I think, it's my job to make cybersecurity part of everybody's job. And so it's my job to help my peers understand why it's so important so that they can go out then and be advocates for it with their team. What really burns me out is when I have senior leaders and peers that when somebody's complaining to them about something that we're asking them to do or something they don't like, they say, well, go talk to Melissa. Instead of saying, well, I understand your concern, but they're helping to explain it and make it part of the entire culture, not just an IT initiative. And so I think that's one thing that really helps with burnout is where everybody's in it together and we're not just pushing problems off to other people, and you have that support when you walk in the door every day.
Bourbon. No. In all seriousness, though, I think it comes back to a couple different things. As a risk management professional, a lot of us in here got into the field because at some point, or maybe you still are, you're very curious and you're challenged. You like it stretching your muscles a little bit, right? I didn't leave my previous role because I was unhappy about it or because I was burnt out, but something happened to come open, which could stretch my muscles a little bit more, build a program from the ground up, right? So that curiosity was piqued, right? A challenge that I hadn't got exposed to before. I think as a CISO or a security leader of any level, it's always very exciting and humbling. We want to better ourselves, grow ourselves, and by virtue growing our team and empowering our team. To avoid burnout, though, it does take a lot of discipline because there's going to be an enormous amount of work, more work than any of us, even with the resources, funding, teams could accomplish in a day, week, month, year. And so being cognizant that it's, again, that long game, that as long as our prioritization is rock solid, we know there's going to be some give and take, some good and bad. Be deliberate about taking some time off, be deliberate about self-help, and personally, a little bit of stubbornness goes a long way because I'm able to let a lot of stuff slide off the back, right? You have to be able to not take things personally. You have to be able to stay focused on doing the mission and taking care of your team. And not to invoke Simon Sinek too much, but know your why. What drives you at the end of the day, right? If it is things like status, paycheck, you name it, you're going to be jumping around forever, right? Because you can jump around and never be fully satisfied. If it's about finding the right support from a leader or a manager or the board, once you find that alignment and you have that alignment, you can stay for a while, right? But I do see some leaders moving when there's changes at the leadership level, changes at the board, and all of a sudden the environment that once supported them, right, the expectations change. And so as much as we all agree that having the funding to carry forth our mission for risk management is great and taking care of our team, making sure that the leadership and the board that we work with and partner with and for doesn't also go toxic, because just like folks in this room here might battle toxic peer relationships, I mean, we're all people, we're all human, right? And while everybody has their day, if it repeats for a long time, that can sometimes lead to burnout in some places where you're a scapegoat versus an actual security leader. So you just got to be cognizant of recognizing that and knowing when you have the support, when you don't. But yeah, bourbon.
I was just waiting for somebody to walk up and give Rob a bourbon. So 2 final questions. We have a couple minutes left. So I want to pull on one that Sara knew I was going to ask about, was this debate, the desire, the view of where the CISO should report to or who should report to the CISO. Our question was, some companies are moving to where the CIO now reports to the CISO versus the CISO reporting to the CIO. So I'd like to get each one on the panel to comment on their view of where it should be in the org and what's been the most effective. Start with Sara.
Well, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I'm a big proponent of the CISO role being separate from the CIO. There's a lot to be gained in the synchronicities and the just good communication by being in the same organization. But I just think that we're beyond that as an industry. I think that we've got good leaders. We ought to be competent enough that we can partner with an organization without being under that organization. And I think that I think that for 2 reasons. One is the obvious one. You need that just natural rub between the two. Enable the business, secure the company. And those are always going to have this rub back and forth. And I think there's got to be some separation there. But I think more importantly than that, because I think that that's probably debatable. That's what I believe. I believe that very strongly. I've lived both. I like the separation. But more importantly, like we belong at the big kids table now. This is a big deal. The company needs to recognize, the companies that we work for need to recognize this is an enterprise risk. This is something we all need to be thinking about. Rob's thinking about bourbon. We're trying to get serious here, Rob. I'm pontificating. So those are my thoughts. I do think it needs to be separate, and I do think that we deserve our very own distinct seat at the table.
And I'm going to take the opposite view there. I think it is really beneficial when security and operations and everybody works together, because security needs to be part of everybody's job. And so when security acts like an auditor, when they're not a partner, when they're saying this is wrong, go fix it, but not helping with that process, I think that's where the rub is not beneficial. And if it doesn't work that way, then it can work really well. But my goal is that everybody in technology, and really everybody in the company, is a cybersecurity professional at the end of the day, whether their job is all the time or just a small part of the time. And having everybody in IT thinking like a cybersecurity professional, I think builds it in from the very beginning and helps you create those secure systems that you need from the ground up.
I think I'm the only one on the panel that's both a CIO and a CISO, so I believe that they should be separate, because I think there are conflicting priorities that I even have with myself, besides me just arguing with myself. I think I'm usually going to win that one, but usually let the president kind of use the strategic plan that we have and balance those. I think both positions, as Sara said, we're at the table now. We're making decisions that affect the bottom line of what we're doing. That's both on the security side and on the CIO side. And even a chief data officer, I would say, would probably be in there as well. But those three positions are fundamental in driving any organization. So I think they need to be heard and work together with as a team as well. But they are going to have separate priorities.
Having it separate from IT does make a lot of sense from prioritization. At Hudl, we are the security group. We're actually reports up to the COO group as peers to the financial group and as peers to the technology group. The main reason being operations at our organization functions like a shared services organization, somewhat you might see at some large financial institutions. We deliver standards, guides, and methodologies, assistance to the entire organization to help make sure the end-to-end spectrum of both internal and external capabilities are in alignment with standards. So we were pretty deliberate about making sure that we had the autonomy to make the right decisions, that we were a peer to a lot of the technology and financial leadership. And having it within operations gives us the same weight as some of the more impactful groups. So it's not perfect. And as we establish more formal processes for enterprise risk management, audit committee, you name it, there'll be dotted lines right there. And of course, the one thing that helps that a lot of folks here have mentioned is the open communication up to the top of the house, right? Having them being invested. In my opinion, having that willingness to engage in a very open and vulnerable conversation means more to me than where really security sits, because it means that the leader of the organization and or the board are truly invested in what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. So one final question before we go to drawings and things like that. We want to thank all the sponsors today, because we wouldn't be able to have this event both virtually and in person without the sponsors. So I know one thing that I faced being a CISO and now on the other side of the table is how to best engage. So I'd like each one of you kind of give a quick response to say to the people around the outside of the room, what's the best way to engage with you and how to approach and what do you want those partners to do for you? So I'll start with Rob and come back down.
My answer is very simple. If you are a podcast fan, I would highly recommend you listen to the CISO Vendor Securities, or I think it's called now the CISO Series podcast. They renamed it. The whole intent of that when it started several years ago was to discuss how vendors and or participants are challenged with engaging with security leadership and how they can overcome it and get more personable. So my answer is listen to that, both the CISOs that are chairs and discussing the topics and relevant issues, as well as the guest CISOs and vendors that are there, will give you a lot of the guidance and thought process amongst the CISO community, and it's in a very blunt format with good intentions as well. So without going into detail, subscribe to that, listen to a few episodes, and practice some of the things that are there.
Yeah, I like the word blunt that you use, because with me being in the military, I want to have a good relation with the vendor, but straight out tell me how you're going to help me fix the solution that I have. You can talk to somebody else about the sales thing. If we work together, I'm going to make it work. So that's kind of how I do that. We want the vendors to be part of our team. Once I commit to you helping us out, we're going to be one team together to get the solution that right for the students. So honesty and just straight out tell me what we need to do, and I'll work with you. I think that's the best way to work with it.
I need trusted advisors, so I need to talk to people that are smarter than me and have seen things I haven't seen. So I want to spend time I want to spend a lot more time probably with your security experts than I want to spend with the sales execs. But I need you to understand my business and make recommendations and give me some hard truths too.
Yeah, I agree with everybody here. The relationship, the trust. I mean, our livelihood depends on third parties sometimes, and so I think the relationship is really, really important. And the cold calls, that's just not good. The LinkedIn ads when I don't know you, I think we all get them. That's not super effective. These events are good. Even an invite to dinner is hard, because when you're a CISO, you're getting 20 invites to dinner for every day of the week. And so like this is a good way to get a quick introduction, my opinion, and then see, like to Chad's point, tell me that you at least know enough about, in my case, banking or the challenges in banking that you might know how to help me. And then I think that can start a broader conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's been great. We're at the end. I want to thank the panelists and everybody and the great questions.